Hello and welcome to the first ever virtual Mark Kermode Live in 3D. If you've seen the live shows before, you'll know that we do these every month at the BFI South Bank in London. I've been doing this show for best part of 5 years, and we had our 50th show last month. And what happens is we got a live audience and we bring on a bunch of guests. So in the past, over the last 50 shows, we've had Michael Caine, Amara Santi, Steve Coogan, Ben Wheatley, Hugh Grant, and a whole number of guests have come on. However, since the last show, since the 50th show, obviously everyone is now in lockdown. But we didn't want to stop doing the show. So we've decided to do this edition completely online. So coming up, we have interviews with Gugu Mbatha Raw, Mira Sayal, Neve Algar and Cosmo Jarvis, Jack Howard, and all the way from America, the inimitable Greg Proops. But we're going to start the show, as we always do in the live show, with Ask the Audience, using questions sent in via the miracle of Twitter, Facebook, and other assorted social media. So let's start off with Ask the Audience. Okay, so first question is from Robert Sherrard. Good morning, Dr. Kermode. Actually, evening, doesn't matter. What are the possibilities of you doing a podcast on dead presidents or something in the realm of forgotten gems or similar ilk? This is weirdly coincidental. I have recorded a podcast with Jack Howard, who is coming on the show later on, about films that we think are underrated. And one of the films that I chose was Dead Presidents. Somewhere in my attic, I've got an interview that I did with the Hughes brothers when Dead Presidents came out, because I interviewed them when it was first released. And what I might do is see if I can find that, and maybe we can put it up on the Kermode on Film Patreon page, because it's a great movie. But there is Jack Howard and me discussing that in a Kermode on Film podcast that's coming up pretty soon. From Alan White, why do you think pandemic films like Contagion and zombie films are so popular on streaming sites like Netflix, and what's your favourite? Alan goes on to explain that he thinks that perhaps they're popular because people are looking for tips to get through the pandemic. You probably know that there was a big news story that when all this started, Contagion went to number one in the iTunes charts. In fact, funnily enough, I did what everybody else did. I watched Contagion, which I haven't seen since it came out, and it is astonishing how close some of it is to what's actually happening. Personally, I think that after that initial fascination with pandemic films, weirdly enough, most people who've been in lockdown for, 4 or 5 weeks, I kind of lose track of time, actually aren't looking for films about pandemics anymore. What most people are looking to films for is some form of escapism. That said, there is a film which has just opened on for viewing in the home. It was going to have a theatrical release, but you can see it in the home. It's called Sea Fever. And there is a subplot in Sea Fever, which is a kind of really intelligent, smart creature feature set on a boat. People who find themselves encountering a parasite. And then there is a kind of weird contagion, isolation subplot. And it really does seem particularly prescient at the moment. Obviously, when they made the film, they didn't have any idea about what would be going on now. And actually, I thought that did add dramatic heft to the film. But generally, my feeling is that what people really want at the moment is singing and dancing and Fred Astaire and anything to take their minds off what's going on. Thanks for the question, though, Alan. This is from Cameron Kahn. Just listen to your Kermode on Film podcast on Steven Soderbergh films. I would love a top 5 of your Kubrick and or Scorsese films. Okay, so it's Kubrick and or Scorsese. Well, let's do both. And just to kind of play devil's advocate, we'll do them in reverse order. So Kubrick, probably number 5, The Shining. I mean, I like The Shining. I like it enough. I don't think it's his best work by any means, and I kind of share some of Stephen King's reservations about it. So I would say The Shining, number 5. Number 4, Dr. Strangelove, because it's sharp and funny, but again, not my favourite Kubrick film. Number 3, 2001, which is one of the first science fiction films I remember seeing as a kid, being completely bowled over by it and loving it. However, not loving it as much as Silent Running. Oh, his foot's fallen off, look. His foot's fallen off. Wow, I better put you back up there. Not loving it as much as Silent Running. Number 2, Clockwork Orange, because, well, for me particularly, because it was banned, unofficially banned. It was banned by Kubrick from exhibition in the UK, so you couldn't see it. And I remember a friend of mine sending me a video copy of it that had been imported from another country, and it felt so terribly illicit watching it. And actually, it still does stand up. It was re-released after Stanley Kubrick died, and it still is it's a brilliant performance by Malcolm McDowell. I think Malcolm McDowell dances his way through that movie, and it's great. And at number one, just at the moment, and it might change, I kind of said this a while ago, Barry Lyndon. I hadn't seen Barry Lyndon for ages, and I saw it at the BFI South Bank when it was reissued in a 4K transfer, and I thought it looked absolutely fantastic. I'd forgotten how funny it was. I'd forgotten how great the use of music was. So right at the moment, Barry Lyndon. As far as Scorsese is concerned, well, let's do Raging Bull at 5, Age of Innocence at 4, Mean Streets at 3. No, let's do Goodfellas at 3, Mean Streets at 2, and number 1, no surprise, King of Comedy, which is still my favourite Scorsese film. I'm sure everybody has their own ideas. Please write in and tell me how wrong I am. Anyway, time now to introduce our first guest to MK3D. You may well know that Misbehaviour has recently come to streaming services. It opened in UK cinemas just before the lockdown, and I reviewed it when it came out in cinemas, and I really, really liked it. It is a brilliant recreation of the disruption of the 1970 Miss World competition. It's a great story. It's really, really well told, very well directed by Philippa Lowthorpe. I kind of was reminded of the charm of Made in Dagenham. Anyway, the film stars Gugu Mbatha-Raw alongside Keira Knightley, and Gugu agreed to speak to us through the miracle of the internet from her home in America. Here's me talking to Gugu Mbatha-Raw a couple of days ago. Gugu, welcome to MK3D, the first virtual one that we've done because of lockdown. How fabulous that we are able to do this through the miracle of the internet. Where are you? Where am I speaking to you?
I'm in LA. You know, I was working in Atlanta when all of this lockdown started. You know, I'd just come back to London to promote Misbehaviour, which, you know, we sort of got that trip in sort of by the skin of our teeth, really, because we had the premiere in London on the Monday, and I flew back to Atlanta on the Tuesday, and, you know, pretty much 2 days later there was a travel ban, and, you know, stay in your house kind of thing.
And are you managing to get any work done at home? Are you like, do you rehearse, or you vocals, or you write, or what are you doing?
You know, there's a few voice things that have come my way. So I've been trying to see what I can technically manage from home. Also, one of the bonuses, I think, is I've rediscovered painting, which is something that I really, really loved growing up. And for me, it was kind of a toss-up between painting or art and acting when I was about 17, and you know, so I ended up choosing acting because it was a bit more collaborative, and painting and drawing just got me into this very sort of isolated headspace, which ironically is sort of perfect now because it's a nice creative outlet. But I don't know, it's fun. It's one of those things where I think, you know, as an actor, you're constantly being other people, and you're constantly researching, and I think sometimes just to do something that makes you lose track of time, to be able to reconnect with that is really fun.
Last year, 100 million people tuned in live to Miss World, more viewers than for the moon landings or the World Cup final.
Beautiful, darling.
Mum, don't.
I'm the first Black South African to take part.
I'm the first Miss Grenada.
They're turning oppression into spectacle. Let's make a spectacle of our own. We'd infiltrate the theatre.
We've just been smoking and watching like in a heist film.
Now, look, you said that just before all this happened, you came over for the Misbehaviour premiere, and of course it opened in cinemas, and I reviewed it at the time, and I liked it very, very much, really, really enjoyed it. And then one of the things that happened with lockdown is that the film became available digitally. So we digitally downloaded it here for the house, and me and my wife and my son all sat and watched it just a couple of nights ago, and loved it all over again, and had a little bit of a Twitter interaction with Philippa Lowthorpe saying, you know, second time round I enjoyed it so much. Give us just a quick background to what the story is, because of course it's a stranger than fiction true story, and it's one of those things that you couldn't have made it up.
No, it's amazing. I mean, it's such a collision in history of all these events that happened in 1970, where around the Miss World competition, which was the most watched TV program in the world at the time, the women's liberation movement, who were relatively newly formed in London, stormed the ceremony and completely disrupted it on live TV and threw flower bombs at Bob Hope. And, it was a huge disruption, but it was also the same year that the first woman of colour, Miss Grenada, Jennifer Hoston, who I play, won the competition. So it's very intersectional, if you like, in terms of the birth of feminism in many ways, and that sort of media springboard that they had with all of that publicity, but also perceptions of beauty and women of color being perceived as eligible to be beauty queens on the world stage. So it's sort of a fascinating combination of things, and it's really fun as well. I mean, I think especially how topical all of the themes of the women's movement have become in the last few years, and the legacy of that, and Me Too and everything. But this is really fascinating as well to see, the period 1970, the costumes and the music, and there is a sort of slight kitsch element to it, and it's done with a light touch, I think. But I love the fact that it's also, really about something.
But what I really, really loved was that, so it's dealing with quite complex issues. And it seems to me that what Philippa Lothorpe has done is to tell that story in a way which is like, okay, anyone can watch this as a piece of entertainment. You don't need to go into it with an agenda. You watch it because it's really entertaining, and then it tells you this really important story.
Absolutely. And I felt that the moment I read the script. I mean, I didn't really see myself as a Miss World candidate, and I think, to be quite frank, I was relatively judgmental about beauty competitions. It's not really something that I looked into much. And reading the script, it was so sparkly, and, there was a wit to it. And as you say, you don't need, it's not it is based on his historical fact, but it doesn't feel like it's ramming it down your throat. It's funny. And I think I love all the different points of view that it expresses, from Keira Knightley's character, who's sort of drawn into the sort of women's liberation movement, to sort of a more militant feminist played by Jessie Buckley, and then the generational differences of, Keira's character's mother, and how she looks at Miss World, and the daughters, and, I just think it's really just got all of the sort of layers and nuances. It's just funny, I think, that we can look back at that period and hopefully laugh, hopefully celebrate how far feminism has come, but also, take a sigh of relief that, women are not referred to, in that way, and that's not really, the standard today.
I was kind of shocked watching it because, of course, in 1970, I was 7 years old, but I do remember the whole family sitting down and watching Miss World, and we didn't think there was anything weird about it at all, because everybody sat down and watched Miss World, and then you watch it on the film, you think, we watched this? I mean, it's really genuinely creepy.
Yeah, and I think, that's the amazing thing about, even Bob Hope. They didn't really have to do much to the script, to the words that Greg Kinnear says as Bob Hope, in terms of how he referred to women as, or this cattle market, and, used all of this analogy comparing them to horses and cows, and, just so degrading and misogynistic. And, and I think the wonderful thing, going back to Philippa Lothorpe, of how she captured that is that she really sort of makes it from the female gaze, and you get those moments that when I watched the original footage where the women really turn their bottoms to the audience for sort of more of an appraisal, and you think, wow, that's just so humiliating. I can't believe they did that, and I think what Philippa really felt strongly about having that moment in the film, but also, turning the camera around so that you get to see the women's faces, and you get to see the gritted teeth, and you get to see the sort of the humiliation, and what really, from their point of view, what they're going through. So yeah, I loved working with her for that, and the fact that she really wanted to kind of show that dimension.
I must ask you very quickly. I'm a huge fan of Anne Morosanti, and I'm a huge fan of Belle, and my family's from the Isle of Man. So,
oh wow! I didn't know that.
Yeah. So militantly Manx. So I'm imagining that you still have good memories of making Belle, which is just such a terrific film. And again, a very important story, but told in a way, Amma said, kind of almost like making a sort of a costume drama that just happened to have this really solid political story behind it. Do you have good memories of making Belle?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that was just such a special experience. I mean, beyond being the first lead role that I ever really had on screen, but also the story itself, the fact that it was inspired by a true story. story, and just really working with Amma and that incredible cast, you know, from Tom Wilkinson to Penelope Wilton, Emily Watson. I mean, everybody was just so amazing, and you know, being you know, in the Isle of Man for 3 weeks was kind of isolating for the cast, but it was good because it meant we all bonded. And then when we were able to come back to London, you know, and shoot at, you know, Chiswick House or Syon Park or, you know, all those other gorgeous locations, you know, we'd all sort of had this amazing sort of experience doing all the exteriors in the Isle of Man beforehand. So yeah, it was so special.
Well, thanks to Gugu for that. If you want to hear a longer version of that interview, we'll be putting a longer version up on the Kermode on Film podcast. You can also go to the Kermode on Film Patreon page, where all the interviews that are in this show will be available in longer form, with fantastic video images as well. So thanks ever so much to Gugu. Moving straight on to our next guest. If you're a regular here at MK3D, or you download the Kermode on Film podcast, you'll know that I've done quite a few podcasts with Jack Howard. And Jack and I sort of spar about movies that we like and movies that we don't like. We often differ in our opinions of things, but I wanted to catch up with him about how he's been doing in lockdown, and he had a confession to make. So, hello from sunny Hampshire to Jack in what's that poster on your... Is that your bedroom that we're actually in? Oh, have you dressed the set?
We're in my bedroom. It's not a fake background on Zoom this time.
Why are you dressed as James Bond?
Well, I thought, you know, put a bit of effort in, since, you know, we're coming from home this time rather than doing it in person. I thought, but to be honest, I am wearing pajamas on the bottom.
Oh no, that's really lovely.
So I've got the sort of party on the top and the comfort on the bottom.
You've shamed me. I have brushed my hair.
Everyone's shaving their heads at the moment in isolation, and I'm a little bit tempted. I'm tempted to just get rid of it all.
Jack, I haven't brought you on the show to talk about haircuts, although obviously it's a nice subject to catch up on. What have you been doing? I know that you and I have recorded some podcasts, but what have you been doing during lockdown? How are you? All fine and everything?
Yeah, I'm all good. You know, I'm doing my thing. I'm trying to keep creative. I've got a couple of jobs coming in, thank God. But yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm enjoying most about self-isolation is, we talked about it a little bit on the podcast, is the sense of community that still exists around film. Like, I'm a part of so many what we're calling self-isolation film clubs. Me and my friends are sort of got these little WhatsApp groups, and we're all getting together and watching films that sometimes people have never seen. And I think that now is a good time to be watching films that we've never seen before. I've got a fair few that I think I'm ashamed that I haven't seen, but I wanted to confess something to you specifically. Okay, this is going to be I've never seen The Exorcist. I've never seen The Exorcist. I'm sorry to... I just knew the way that you said that was what you were going to say, because you've never said that to me before, and that's it. I thought I'd do it now from a safe distance. Have you never seen it on purpose, or have you just never seen it by accident? See, I've avoided most things from The Exorcist. I know the head spinning, vomiting stuff, like... Yeah. But I know very little about The Exorcist. Okay. Well, here's the main thing, and funnily enough, I'm kind of glad to hear you say I've never seen it and that you've avoided it. The worst thing that anyone can say is, I've seen bits of it. I saw some of it. It was on television and I watched the first half of it. Because in a way, all that does is spoil the experience of the film. I don't care whether people like it or not, but what I care is that they watch it from beginning to end as the film was intended to be. So in fact, what you're doing is... After now I've got over the shock of I've never seen The Exorcist. What you're doing is actually fine, because you've never seen The Exorcist. Are you going to use this isolation time to do that? No. I've come this far. No. I wanted to bring it up with you specifically because I wanted to be like, I'm setting the intention now. I've never seen it, and now I think is the time to do it. And then the next time we have a conversation, we'll have a little discussion about The Exorcist. So, to two things. Firstly, which version are you going to watch? Oh, I didn't even know this was an option. Yeah. Is it like a Blade Runner situation? Well, there's only two. So there's the version, the original version, and then there's the version you've never seen, which of course I have seen. So Bill Blatty, the screenwriter, always preferred the version you've never seen, which has got some sort of extra dramatic scenes in it. And Friedkin, I think at the time, actually thought that version was better. My advice to you, however, if you're going to watch it for the first time, watch the original version. Okay. Just to understand what the film was. There is a brutality to the original version which is like being run over by a truck. The recut version
is a softer experience. I prefer it because of that, but I can't deny the power of the original version.
It's interesting that somebody went back that late and did a recut of something. Is that the latest that you can think of somebody going back and changing? Because I know obviously George Lucas is famous for it in terms of touching up the Star Wars films completely unnecessarily. And then obviously the good example of it is Blade Runner, where actually 3 versions, I believe. There's Blade Runner, the final cut, and the director's cut, and then the final cut, I think.
Yeah.
All of which changed the film ever so slightly, and obviously massively in terms of like where it leaves you and the ending. But does The Exorcist change that much?
Well, the interesting thing is that in all the cases that you're citing, specifically with Blade Runner, Ridley Scott was never happy with the first version of Blade Runner. The first version of Blade Runner wasn't the director's cut. The first version of Blade Runner was a cut that they arrived at after disastrous test screenings. Friedkin never had any problem with the original version of The Exorcist. It was always his cut, which is why when people wrongly refer to the new version as the director's cut, it's not the director's cut. If anything, it's the writer's cut, and that's why the version you've never seen is interesting.
I think it probably makes a difference that it was done, like you say, 25, 30 years after he had made it. He was able to come back at it and go, okay, what else can I put into this story that everybody knows so well now? What that's making me think of is why I love Little Women so much, and film that just deals with memory in general. We've been talking about Solaris quite a lot recently, and I think that film deals with that as well in a really beautiful way. It's just about how people remember things weirdly. And in Solaris, in Steven Soderbergh's version of Solaris, because I haven't even seen the longer Tarkovsky version, but not bothered, no. But there's a bit where you're introduced to Rhea for the first time, and she's just holding a doorknob, and you never find out why. It's just this very quirky, weird little detail, and to me that's just, he remembers her holding something odd, like there's something that she was doing. And that's what it sort of feels like to me. It feels like that story of just, I remember this weird thing happening, but I can't quite place what it was. Maybe it was this. And being honest about how your memory can sort of shift and change, and how you remember things affecting how you feel about things now. And I find that endlessly fascinating in cinema, because I think it demonstrates it better than any other format can.
Shall we now agree that the next blog we do together will be Jack's debrief
of The
Exorcist? Yeah.
Let's do it.
Well, I look forward to the debrief with Jack after he's watched The Exorcist. Now, a few weeks ago, a film called Calm with Horses opened in UK cinemas, and I reviewed it. I was really, really knocked out by it. It's a debut feature by Nick Rowland. It's got terrific central performances by Cosmo Jarvis and Neve Algar, and it's a really interesting story about a kind of broken boxer who's having to decide between his real family and the crime family to who he's basically sold his soul and become an enforcer. Anyway, the film had a brief theatrical outing, like Misbehaviour, slightly longer, but I think it really, it was something that people wanted to see in cinemas, but obviously cinemas are no longer playing the film. So, right about now, in fact, just as I'm talking pretty much, Calm with Horses is coming to digital services, so you can watch it at home, and I would absolutely advise you to do so. So I was delighted to be able to speak to Neve Algar and Cosmo Jarvis about Calm with Horses, which is available to view in the home. So, delighted to welcome to the show Neve and Cosmo. Thank you so much for coming on. This is a virtual MK3D because obviously we're in strange circumstances. So how are you both bearing up under this? Are you managing to get any work done? Are you managing to get any rehearsal or writing done? Neve, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, it's definitely been a good time to read loads, that's for sure. Projects that looking long-term development. So to have conversations kind of this early on with writers has been really interesting. But then I don't know, I like to be busy and I like people. So this has been the weirdest time to just have so much time to think. But I'm telling you, the minute I get back on set, I will never take anything ever again for granted.
Cosmo, you making music? What are you doing?
I'm trying to just, do the dishes when there are dishes to do them. I went for a skate yesterday. I'm trying to save up my exercise points. I probably shouldn't have, but I went into central London and just ripped around Leicester Square, and it was amazing because it was abandoned, and I wish that I'd known in hindsight that it was going to be that abandoned. I'm sure lots of people do, because the amount of opportunities you could have had for filming an apocalyptic scene is just... Anyway, skateboarding around an abandoned city is really great.
I'm told I was a violent child. I can hurt people. Most people know to stay on the right side of the Devers family. I'm what you meet if you ever find yourself on the wrong side. People say they're trouble, the Devers.
I didn't get the joke, lads.
But I say all families have their problems.
I don't want him to be around you because of the things that you do.
Wise up, Arm.
Wise up?
Yeah, wise up.
You were never like this before, you know that? Before them Devers got their hands on you.
Because one of the things that this has meant is that Calm with Horses, which I'm not just saying this because I reviewed it many weeks ago when it first came out. I'm a real fan of Calm with Horses. I think it's terrific. In fact, of course, what's now happened is that it's come to digital. People can watch it digitally from today. In fact, now Niamh, in terms of the character that you play, she is kind of the heart of his attentions and his affections. But she has to be a tough character. She's a character who's, defending her child, and she knows that, they're still kind of in love with each other on one hand, but she knows that what's happened to Arm is that he's now kind of tethered to this other family. I mean, is that how difficult is it to play a character who is that strong and also at the same time that kind of tender and that sensitive? Because she has to be the central focus of everything that's happening.
I think it's just Jack has become her entire world, and anything then that becomes between him, anything that comes between him, she will go through it. And also I had to make sure that I kept in mind that Ursula has a history, that she is not too far from Arm. There was a time when the people whom she hung out with probably were close enough to the Devers. So for her, she just was making sure that she didn't ever take a step back. It was maintaining that vulnerability and that strength, but also she does have her own flaws, and it's easy to, I think, for her to fall into that. But yeah, I think it was also just making sure that these two characters still possibly can have a future together, that it wasn't completely dead in the water. And myself and Cosmo did a lot of kind of pre-work and creating their history together, and how they met up, and these are two young loves, and they've just taken completely two different paths in life.
So when you do that, do you literally create a backstory for the characters of stuff that happened to them before we meet them in the film?
I was like, when I first met Cosmo, I was like, I totally got who he was as an actor, and I knew he would be very open to just hanging out. And we actually did that when I flew back to Ireland. We literally went to this like corner shop, bought like a bag of cans of, I think it was like cider and like cheap crisps, and just sat by the canal and just chatted. And it was Cosmo had gotten like a costume that was very much Arm's and was wearing it, and it was just easy to just kind of slip in and create stories and conversations that these two characters would have had, and just getting to know one another as Niamh and Cosmo, and you just build upon that. And I think the most important thing was just building trust. So when these two people are exploding in one another, that you're not afraid to like step over the line, and if you do, you can easily just kind of tap someone on the shoulder and like, just let's go again, or I'm sorry that I said that, but yeah. I think
it's really valuable too, because whatever that you do gain, and there is something that you do gain from interactions like that, but whatever that you do gain, you can't forget it and leave it behind once the scene started. So it's very recognizable that it does get brought along, whether you like it or not, the history that you've built in real life into whatever work you're doing when the cameras are rolling. So yeah.
The third part of this relationship is obviously the young child. Can you both say something about working with your young co-star and how you developed that relationship?
I at first I was nervous, but after meeting, Cillian's really he's a confident lad. He's outgoing. Yeah. He doesn't take any. You can't get anything past him. Like he's definitely wiser than I am. So it was great, and he kind of kept me on, and we hung out with him a lot before to try and set him at ease for any, because it was, I think, it's his first time, so everybody knew that it would be quite an experience for a lad that age to come.
How old is he, Cosmo?
I think at the time he must have been five.
Five. He was 5 when we were five when we were shooting it, but. I can remember I was watching a scene where it's just after he has a meltdown at the fair, and he fully goes for it, and he was like, he's fearless. I think that's it. When you're like 5 years old, you're fearless, and he understands. When you call action, we're playing, and once we call cut, he picks up a ball, and then we start playing football. So it was actually really lovely to have a kid on set, because people, I think, behave a lot better, and days are shorter.
And tell me a little bit about your director, because it's his first feature, and it's such a confident piece that the film has a real kind of widescreen kind of epic scope to it, despite the fact that it's a very intimate story. So tell me about him and what it was like working with him.
Well, when I had first read this script, I was familiar with Colin's story, and then Joe had adapted it, and then I'd watched some of Nick's shorts, and I kind of knew that no matter what the story, despite it being this crime thriller, was definitely going to have this strong heartbeat throughout it. And Nick is he's a very emotional and approachable guy, but then he's there's a scene in it with the car chase, and it's one of the best car chases I've ever seen, and then Nick is like, oh yeah, I was a professional rally driver when I was 12 years old. You're like, what? Who are you?
He's an anomaly as far as people that I've met just in general, regardless of whether they're film directors. He's a really gentle dude, and he always cares about the emotional core of what's going on first and foremost. And despite the sort of subject matter of everything in the movie, and like you say, the darkness and some of the emotional stakes, and he was really careful, I would say, with his actors.
Look, let me tell you, Jack, tomorrow I take him home there. Just him and me, no Dimpler, no Devers, no nonsense, right?
I don't know. I don't think you could cope. It's not that simple.
Well, let me show you. Jack loves it here, don't you? He still loves it here. Let me show you what I can take care of him. Try and nurse.
Anyway, listen, guys, thank you so much for coming on the show. Stay safe, stay at home, protect the NHS, all the rest of it. And I really hope that Calm with Horses gets a great audience on digital, because it really deserves to. It's shaping up as one of my favourite films of the year. And I hope that when all this is all finished, you'll both come on the show live back at the BFI South Bank, and we can do this in person, and we can have the drink that we didn't manage to have before. So as I said before, if you haven't had the chance to see Calm with Horses yet, do seek it out. It's really terrific. Great performances from Niamh and Cosmo. Time now for another audience question. This came in from Michael Greville. We did some audience questions at the beginning of the show. I usually kind of intersperse them throughout the live show. So let's imagine that Michael's in the audience. Michael, you have a question. Great, brilliant. Here it is. It may be a couple of years until the big US studios can rely on the big box office returns of mega movies. What might happen? Might we go back to seeing big stars in some of those clever relationship movies that seem to have been killed off in about 2012, 2013? Thinking of Paul Haggis's Third Person, for example. Now, the question of how the film industry is going to react to everything that's been happening is really, really hard to answer. I mean, particularly for me, because I'm a film critic, not a filmmaker. So there's a lot of people saying, well, maybe we will get interesting, thoughtful movies about ideas rather than movies about spectacle. Maybe right now there's a bunch of people writing a bunch of lockdown scripts. I mean, I think people are expecting a whole kind of welter of movies about the trials of lockdown. However, there are certain forms of film production that are still going on. And bear in mind, if you're making kind of great big blockbuster spectacular, it is possible for people to work on special effects, visual effects, animation at home in isolation. So exactly how the film industry is going to react to everything that's happening at the moment, it is really, really hard to say. One person who may know more than many is Ben Roberts, who is the new chief executive of the BFI. And of course, Ben took over in that position almost immediately before the current coronavirus crisis began. So I spoke to Ben Roberts about his new position at the BFI and how the BFI particular and the film industry in general are reacting to the current situation. Ben, welcome to the first virtual MK3D. Let me begin by saying congratulations on your fantastic appointment, which you came to at a moment in which the first thing you had to do was deal with the kind of unfolding crisis. So tell me what the first few weeks of Chief Executive of BFI have been like for you.
Yeah, well, I assumed the position, I think, 2 weeks before we had to cancel BFI Flare and subsequently close the South Bank and the National Archive. So it wasn't quite the trajectory I was planning for all of us to sort of go into sort of new levels of activity and move to the next phase of the BFI. I think lots of decisions were made that 24 hours previously would have seemed quite inconceivable. It was a fascinating couple of weeks, and I'd say the adrenaline has now moved into very, very considered, careful planning with the rest of the industry and the organisation about how we start to come out of it, though we don't know when we will.
So when you say start planning with the rest of the industry, how so far has the British film industry dealt with this? I mean, I know everyone says it, and I know the word is overused, but this unprecedented turn of events.
The industry has been remarkably collegiate and coordinated. And I think we may have benefited, and I'm loath to say this, but I think we may have benefited from some Brexit planning a year or so ago when DCMS, our government department, asked us to sort of come together to channel all of the ways in which we as an industry need to sort of think about our relationship with the rest of the world as a film industry after Brexit. So we pulled together a task force, which sounds a bit like Trump's Space Force, but it was a sort of cross-industry group that came together to look at what we might need financially, policy-wise. What were the things that were going to trip us up around Brexit? Yeah. And actually, one of the first things we did was we just pulled that task force back together, and that spans everybody: the cinema associations, the distributor associations, the studios, independent production companies. It was just a way of bringing together the entire industry and saying, okay, what should we do?
It's interesting that the resources required to deal with Brexit and the resources required to deal with a catastrophe are so eerily similar. And I know when you said, I'm loath to say this, but I understand what you mean about the planning. In terms of the BFI, what can the BFI do, and what has the BFI done to protect the industry or to help it through what's happening?
I think the first thing is I do think we're like the beating heart of film and cinema, and as much as we sort of talk about industry and economics, what's happening at the moment is we're all asking each other what we're watching, and I think that's been a very sort of heartening reminder that actually what we all do and what you do, what we do, is about storytelling and entertainment and education. And I think that's become even more important through this period of separation and isolation, because we're relying on culture, we're relying on our kind of collective ability to talk to each other and tell stories. So before even thinking economically or industrially, I think that's been fascinating to see how that plays out. We're recording this moment. We're going to try and preserve it. We're running an initiative as part of our National Collections program, which will be called Britain in Lockdown. And we will be running, I think, what's quite a vital sort of video preservation project, so that in 50 or 100 years' time, we'll be able to see how collectively as a nation we were responding online to this unprecedented moment.
And just on the subject of cinemas, do you think that cinemas are going to survive this and come out of it differently? Will things have changed? I can't wait to get back to cinemas. Will the cinemas still be there for us to go back to?
We have a really close relationship with independent cinema, and that group feels very challenged, but incredibly enthused by the idea of getting audiences back into their buildings. And I think there's a real fighting spirit amongst the independent cinema community, because that really is a community, and I think you're right that the audiences to those cinemas will really be missing that sense of community. We've supported a number of the independent cinemas to keep their audiences engaged by giving them channels on BFI Player. So they're curating programs on Player so that they can keep the dialogue going with their audiences. We think that cinemas will get back online and we will all have to sit a little bit apart for a while. I think there's going to be lots of really interesting nuances for us to take into account. And then there's the question of what films are they going to be watching? When do films go back onto the release calendar, and what kind of planning is done for that? So we sort of can't crystal ball gaze too much. I think we're having to really take everything in 1 month, 1 month at a time stages at the moment.
Well, Ben, listen, thank you so much. It's been great catching up with you. I'm encouraged that you sound not just positive, but you sound like things are more under control than perhaps one might have expected. We'll speak to you as soon as, and I'll shake your hand and share a pint with you as soon as it's actually possible.
Yeah, we look forward to having you back, Mark, as well. So thank you for doing this.
Interesting thing about that interview, that is the first interview that Ben Roberts has done since becoming chief executive at the BFI. I mean, clearly a seasoned interviewee. He knows what he's doing. I think he was fine. Now I'm really glad to welcome to the first ever virtual MK3D, the great Meera Syal, to talk about what she's been doing while all this has been going on, but also to discuss both her guilty pleasure and the film that changed her life. The great Meera Syal. Meera Syal. Meera, welcome to MK3D, the first virtual one we've ever had to do. It's a show for 50 shows and now suddenly a virtual show. Welcome to the show. Where are you? Are you in London?
Yes, we're holed up in North London, not far from the Phoenix. You're one of your favourite places.
So how are you managing? Firstly, how are you getting through? What are you doing to get you through lockdown?
Lots of deep breathing. Well, I've got 3 generations in the house. So kids have come home, mum lives with us, so that's it's a sitcom. I'm living in a sitcom. Just sort of trying to stay positive and healthy and hoping that we will all burst forth after this with passion and creativity and ready to do the stuff we love again.
Now, you have been managing to use your time creatively, because I know that you and some other people as well have been individually doing work in isolation. So tell us about what you've been doing.
Oh yeah, I've been doing a project called, funnily enough, Unprecedented, with Headlong Theatre, who have commissioned a number of writers to produce little 10-minute shorts about life in isolation. And the one I've just finished shooting is written by the brilliant April DeAngelis, and it's called House Party, and it is about a bunch of people on the same street who've set up a Zoom meet for the first time, and obviously things don't go to plan. As we all seem to be spending most of our life on Zoom at the moment, it seemed quite a prescient thing to do.
Now, one of the other reasons that I've asked you to come on the show is to choose both a movie that changed your life and a guilty pleasure. And I know you've done both. So let's start with, tell me the movie that changed your life. Which is the movie that's really important to you?
The movie that changed my life is called Imitation of Life, which is a 1959 film directed by Douglas Sirk. And I was probably about 8 or 9, little Indian kid. You know, parents had come over from India. I was born in the country, but I still felt quite an outsider in my own way. Yeah. And this film came on, which is about a white American woman called Lara, played by Lara Turner, who is a budding actress, and she meets a black woman, fantastically played by Juanita Moore, called Annie, who finds her daughter when she goes missing on the beach, and a friendship ensues, and Annie becomes her personal assistant slash maid slash best friend. Now, Annie's daughter, Sarah Jane, is a very light-skinned girl, and she passes herself off as white. She begins to see that the girl that she's grown up with, her best friend, is treated very differently in the world. And so as the girls grow up, this becomes a bigger and bigger thing. The whole film, for me, absolutely drew me in, because here was a character that I'd never seen before on film that absolutely spoke to me about the life I was living, about the situation I was in, where I felt one way, I was seen another way, where I was torn between self-loathing but also wanting to take pride in who I was. And in the journey of Sarah Jane, you see a girl who cannot admit that her mother is her mother. I watched the final quite heartbreaking scene, and I honestly sobbed for about half an hour. I could not get over how it had touched me and how it had illuminated something quite profound for me, which was about identity and belonging and not taking on the shame that the world throws at you for who you are, but having the courage to live through that and claim your difference as something beautiful. And that film was the first film that ever spoke to me in that way.
So, Mira, it's interesting because I remember watching Imitation of Life. I rewatched it when Todd Haynes' Far From Heaven came out, because Todd Haynes had kind of cited it as a film that was really important to him. And the thing I was amazed by was firstly, how intense it is, but secondly, how daring some of the drama is in terms of, the issues that it addresses and the kind of the emotional force with which it addresses them. It really is a powerful movie to watch.
I mean, the social issues and the openness with which it discusses race is quite extraordinary for its time. There's an absolutely excruciating scene where her mother, and they're very estranged by this time, and her mother comes to find her where she's working. And Sarah Jane says, if you love me, you'll leave me alone and you'll never contact me again. And a white woman that she's working with pops her head round and says, are you okay? And her mother, to save her own daughter's shame, pretends to be her maid. Oh, my goodness.
Well, I guess I'll be running along.
And the sort of levels of self-denial and self-hatred, and also the understanding of the mother that to love her child that much that she's willing to say, I will give you your peace, even though it means I can't see you anymore. I mean, it's extraordinary, really.
I mean, I thought those scenes were astonishing, not least because of how brave they are, because you just don't expect that to be in that kind of mainstream melodrama film. The other thing that's worth saying is the film looks fantastic. I mean,
it's lush, isn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose maybe that's why I responded to it. It had a whiff of Bollywood about it, in the same way that Hindi films are just not afraid of those big emotions and of big heartbreak. And they are seen as melodramatic by some people, but for some emotions, that's the only way you can go, right? Because they are too big. You have to go that way. You have to go with them.
And I love that, because I think that what I go to the movies for is to have an emotional response. And that's what melodrama is.
Absolutely. That film really did change the way how I began to see the world, and a glimmer of sort of self-understanding of the journey that might be ahead, and also how I had to handle it. Because the thought of me, denying my mum in that very sort of profound, epic, biblical way, I couldn't imagine doing that. And if the price to pay was that, it wasn't worth it.
Now, as a complete gear change, we also asked you to choose a guilty pleasure. And I have to say, your guilty pleasure is not guilty at all. What did you choose for your guilty pleasure?
I chose When Harry Met Sally. Enough said.
Yeah, but okay. So tell us about the first time you saw it, because believe me, I love When Harry Met Sally. I have seen When Harry Met Sally so many times, and I have no guilt about it. So when did you first see it?
I saw it at the cinema, I think, when it came out. It was 89, I think it must have been. Right. Something like that, yeah. And just remember thinking, well, that's the perfect rom-com. I mean, that that's for me the epitome of the perfect rom-com. It ticked every single box. I love Nora Ephron's writing anyway, but she's on absolutely top form here. Every single line is crafted. You absolutely believe in Harry and Sally, Billy Crystal, Meg Ryan. You believe in that trajectory of their relationship. It asks the big question that we'll always be asking in relationships: can men and women ever be friends without sex getting in the way? And you're rooting for both of them to be together, but you also know that they've totally got to change, both of them, in order to earn each other properly, which is, of course, is a classic rom-com. And everyone feels real. They just feel real. For me, Nora Ephron is a hugely feminist writer because she actually cuts to the truth beyond the politics of just, this is what people go through. This is how lonely it is. This is how hard it is. This is how desperate you get. And yet, peppered through the film are these beautiful nuggets of couples who have been together for years and years, saying how they met and why they've lasted. And that, for me, lifts the film from a great film into a brilliant film, because there's just something really special about those stories that are interweaving Harry and Sally's story. And, of course, right at the end, it's them.
So here's my question to you. Why do you think When Harry Met Sally is a guilty pleasure? Because surely it's like liking Citizen Kane or something. It's a classic. It's a classic.
I suppose I interpreted guilty pleasure as if I could just have the television to myself. I don't think rom-coms are high on the sort of Venn diagram of family likes. It has to be something with a bit of action in it. A bit too mushy and slushy for some in the family, Mark. I love it.
Fantastic to have Meera Syal on the first ever virtual MK3D. Now, of course, one of the things about this show being virtual, as you've noticed, is that we are able to get in touch with people from a number of different places. We spoke to Gugu Mbatha Raw from across the other side of the Atlantic. And our final guest is also coming to us from California. When I say the smartest man in the world, the person that immediately leaps into your mind is the man whose show is entitled just that. He's a legendary Comedy Store player. He's been on the MK3D live show. He and I have spent many, many hours discussing movies. In fact, years ago, back in 1998, when I was making the Exorcist documentary, The Fear of God, Greg was out in California. And Greg came round to the bungalow that we were staying in the Chateau Marmont. That's how glitzy the whole thing was. And I remember spending an evening swapping movie trivia stories with Greg, in which I don't think I've ever laughed so much before or afterwards. So I thought, you know, what better guest to have on this virtual MK3D than taking advantage of the fact that we're not all in the same space and going once again across the Atlantic to link up with the one and only Greg Proops. So, Greg, look, it's lovely to have you on the show. I have to begin by asking you, because we're in, I think, week 4 of lockdown here, and I made two fairly life-changing rules. The first one was I threw out all my Morrissey records, which was great. And the other thing was I made a resolution to not listen to or read anything by the, Cheeto-faced shit gibbon. How are you managing under the rule of that maniac?
Of the Kremlin-controlled carrot, of Mango Mussolini, of Sweet Potato Stalin. Not very well. I mean, Jennifer and I are really lucky because we live in Los Angeles. And we live in a city where they're actually doing things like right now, trying to feed everyone, an active effort to feed all the homeless people, all the disabled people, all the shut-ins, all the old people. This city's making a huge effort to try to keep it together. Yeah. And our governor and our mayor come on every day and speak sense and talk about compassion and what we can do and what we are doing.
Yeah.
I quit watching him about 3 days ago.
Yeah.
He can't go out and whip up his meathead bass, so he goes on TV every day and just cries and whines and impugns people and lies and dissembles and whatnot. So I've finally quit doing all of that. Now I can't. The next day I'll get the highlights from the paper, or TV or whatever, and
Greg,
I can't listen to him anymore. It's upsetting.
But this is so great because this is like two ex-addicts having a conversation about, when did you kick? You're 3 days clean. I'm like 3 weeks clean. It's very different for you. You're actually living in the in the States. So my heart goes out to you, not only for everything that's happening with coronavirus and, so many people doing so much that is so practical, but having to deal with this maniac encouraging people to break the quarantine, to break lockdown, to go out and, claim their rights to poison everybody else.
The groups that you see on TV that are protesting, sometimes are maybe a couple hundred. We call them AstroTurf, is what they call it here, meaning it's fake grassroots.
Okay, yeah.
Most people, including Republicans, want the lockdown to continue. They know that it's the only way to get back to normal is if we lock everything down for 6 months, the curve will go down, and then we can talk about going out to a restaurant or a movie and sitting 10 feet away from each other.
On a very practical note, I mean, obviously you're in lockdown as we are here. I saw a little video that Nick, who produces is producing the segment, sent me of your shrine.
Oh yeah. Well, I was cleaning the garage a couple of weeks ago when we started this lockdown thingy, and I decided to build a shrine to the for the day when the virus is gone. And I started adding things to it. I had an illuminated crystal ball that's blue that you'll see. I found these Rolling Stones stickers that I bought for Jennifer that are from like 81, I think. It's like Keith in a leopard vest, And then I started to think about all the places where the virus was, Italy and Spain and England, all the places that Jennifer and I have been. So I started adding tchotchkes, knickknacks, bric-a-brac, pictures, people that I love, Diana Rigg, Audrey Hepburn, Aretha Franklin, that kind of thing. And every day I put something else out there, and I have a candle, and I put Christmas lights, fairy lights over it. I light the shrine, I put on the light, I light the candle, and I pray that one day this will all be over and we'll all get to do what we love to do. You'll get to go to the pictures again, and we'll all get to go out to dinner and be the traveling ham that I've been for 35 years,
Are you missing the cinema? Because I am finding that, obviously now I'm still carrying on as a film critic, but I'm watching everything at home on laptops because everything has come to home viewing. And it's fine. I mean, we're managing to keep it going. But I am really missing the experience of sitting in cinemas with other people. And I always used to be so grumpy about other people's behaviour in cinemas. Popcorn, noise, chair kicking, telephones. Frankly, right now, I would be happy to sit in the noisiest, popcorniest, everyone on their phones, light everywhere.
People yelling at the screen.
I just want to be back in the. I mean, I stress to say, not in a Trumpy. I want to be back. I want to be back when it's safe, when everything has gone away. But I do miss it. Do you miss that experience?
Very much so. You know that we have a film club here. We have been running it for, 7-8 years at least. And on March 11th, I think was our last one, or March 8th, which seems way scary now that we did this. We showed High and Low by Kurosawa. And the month before that, we showed Ridicule by Patrice Leconte. And you'd think, who's going to come out to see a 25-year-old French picture or a 50-year-old Japanese picture? And the place was packed. I miss it more than anything because we love movies, Mark. And part of being the movie experience for me is watching the crowd laugh or watching the crowd freak out or their reaction after a movie's over, like High and Low. You could tell everybody was contemplating the philosophy of, just to briefly, the plot is a rich guy's son is kidnapped, but it's the wrong son. They actually kidnap his chauffeur's son. So he has to decide morally whether he's going to pay the ransom or not. So it's about class, society, criminality, the police. The guy who kidnaps him lives in a crummy neighborhood at the bottom of the hill. The rich guy lives at the top of the hill. It's all symbolic and beautifully realized because it's Kurosawa. And then the Patrice Leconte Ridicule one is that guy's a noble in rural France. His town is being killed by the malarial swamp. So there's a plague going around his town. So he goes to the court of the Sun King to try to influence the king to give him the money to dredge the swamp. It's a beautiful movie, and his ticket to getting to meet the king is that he's funny. And that's what the plot of the movie is. On his rapier wit, he builds his reputation at court. And the king says, "Would you make a joke about me?" And he says, "The king is not a subject." And the king goes, "Oh!" And like, you know, he gets the joke. And so the movies that we're showing, Jennifer picks them because of how much they're about right now. But without being, you know, hitting the hammer too hard.
Okay, so these are great examples, and these are great films to talk about, and great films to go back to the cinema to see. I hear you got busted watching Day After Tomorrow.
Yeah, I was having a total meltdown a couple of weeks ago, and I watched Children of Men and Day After Tomorrow back to back.
Okay, but you okay, those are two. But Children of Men is a really good film. Children of Men is a proper good film. Day After Tomorrow is terrible.
It's garbage.
Yeah. So
what's his name? The guy who did is it Roland Emmerich or whatever?
Yeah, Roland Emmerich. Yeah, the Master of Disaster.
And by the way, Dennis Quaid.
Dennis Quaid is
like a Trumpkin.
Yes, exactly. Dennis Quaid has just recently come out and said, "I think we should all stand behind President Trump. I think he's doing a jolly good job." Really? When did that happen? Has that been around for a while? It blindsided me.
I was blindsided by it too. Like James Woods, we've known about because James Woods. You can find James Woods most nights, not now, hate tweeting from his booth at Dantana's. Like, just hate tweeting Hillary all night long. And James Woods is a brilliant actor. I mean, he's funny, he's scary.
Well, you know, Greg, he's the main orifice in David Cronenberg's Videodrome. You know, so, I mean, every time I see James Woods, I just always imagine him sitting on a sofa with a huge vaginal hole in his front, putting his hand in and pulling out the strange, you know, futuristic gun. Or him putting his head into the television set with Debbie Harry's lips engaging his whole head. I think that's great. How did you go from that to that? How did that happen? I always, you know, wonder whether Donald Trump has seen Videodrome. Hey, Donald, look at this. This is, you know, actually, the thought of Donald Trump watching Videodrome is just too creepy to even imagine.
Long live the new flesh.
The great Greg Proops talking to us from the other side of the Atlantic. Now, as with all the interviews on tonight's virtual MK3D, there are longer versions of them. Obviously, we've cut them down for the programme, but if you want to hear longer versions of them, we'll be putting longer audio versions out on the Kermode on Film podcast, which you can get from all your favourite podcast suppliers. Also, if you go to the Kermode on Film Patreon page, there will be video versions of the longer interviews. We'll start putting them up in the next few days. Not only that, on the Patreon page, we're also building an archive of all the old shows recorded live at the BFI South Bank. Do go to the Kermode on Film Patreon page and check it out. I'm imagining that the next MK3D is also going to be virtual because obviously the current situation looks like it's going to last for a while. So get in touch and, you know, tell me what you'd like to see on the next virtual show. Now, we always like to finish the MK3D live shows with Sound and Vision, which is, you know, a musical selection from a film because we've always had a musical element to the show. So we're going to finish with a fantastic clip from Frances Ha, which I think at the moment, the sight of somebody running through streets joyfully listening to music is something that can lift all our spirits. Let me just finish by saying thanks to Nick and Heather for putting the show together and making it all work. Thank you to the BFI for supporting us and allowing us to do this. As I said, it looks like this situation is going to carry on for the foreseeable future, and therefore we will carry on doing the MK3Ds in a virtual format until the time is right to be back in our natural home at the BFI South Bank. So thanks to Nick, thanks to Heather, thanks to the BFI, and most importantly, thank you to you for watching and for tuning in. Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives, keep watching the skies. Thank you.